Welcome to Series 3, Episode 6 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Welcome back to the podcast. So Series 3 is all about making money. And one of the biggest human emotions that gets in our way of making more money is overwhelm. Now, last week I woke up it's the summer holidays here right now and decided that I would kind of clear out my boys' bedrooms. You know, it was a rainy morning and the kids were a little bit restless. And I know that every time I go into their rooms and have a good old clear out, I always end up pulling out some amazing new toy for them to play with, which, by the way, is not a new toy, but just one that they've completely forgotten about and has been gathering dust somewhere in the back of a cupboard or underneath their beds. I'm sure for those of you that have children can completely resonate with this. So my top money tip, first of all, by the way, of making more money is move your kids' toys around like every 6 months before you go and buy new ones. And it's amazing what fun they have with playing with old toys again. It kind of reminds me of that Toy Story moment when Andy pulls out Woody and kind of forgets that he's even got him and starts playing with him again. Now, after kind of going through this clear out and, you know, binning a few sheets of paper and random blue tack stuck on the wall and colour coordinating the Lego bricks. That's a joke, by the way. It would probably take me about 30 years to do that. I realised that I was actually kind of just moving the clutter around from one place in the room to another. And it reminded me of money and decluttering our finances. And how often do we just move money from one place to the next without really actually improving our financial position at all? And often the emotion of overwhelm really kicks in. You know, we see the paperwork mounting on the kitchen worktop, so we move it into a pile in the office. And then sometimes we might be looking for a particular document, so we go into the office and we think, oh, I really need to sort this out, sort out this pile. But just the thought of tackling this now ever-growing mountain of paperwork is so overwhelming that we just dismiss it and tell ourselves that there's something more important to do. So what could you do to stop feeling so overwhelmed about money? My first tip is to recognise that it is just a feeling. Overwhelm is just a feeling. Nobody's actually going to die if you don't do what you are overwhelmed about. No one's going to die if you don't sort out that financial paperwork. So tip number 1 is to understand that internal emotion is what's creating the outer emotion. So you may be feeling it like physically, sweating, like headaches, shouting at everybody, maybe feeling a little bit down, beating yourself up, that kind of inner critic comes out. So the first thing is just to recognize that it's a feeling, pause, and just notice that feeling. Just notice the fact that, I'm actually feeling really overwhelmed about sorting out this paperwork. Or maybe you're feeling particularly overwhelmed about renewing that car insurance or looking at your pension statements or starting an investment plan. But just pause and notice that feeling. Now, the second tip is to then literally just dump it all out. Grab some paper and a pen and a couple of highlighters. Any excuse for some highlighters, right? Pause this podcast right now. Or if you're reading this on the blog, I want you to grab that piece of paper and a pen and just pause. Are you still listening? Have you paused? What I want you to do is to write down everything that is causing you to feel overwhelmed. Okay, write your little fingers off until they can't write anymore. Off you go. Wow, right, that was crazy. So is your hand hurting? No? Right, go off and keep going. Now go and grab yourself a cup of tea, a glass of wine if you're listening just in the evening. If you're driving, maybe just stop. But just pause, okay? Now look at your list and highlight in 4 different colours these 4 areas. So I've put this into like a little analogy for you. Now, I had to come up with something that I know that you'll remember, and it had to be related to stepping into your financial shoes, right? So let's get started. The analogy is shoe. So let's start with S. S is for someone else. So try this. For the next few days, before you do anything on your list, ask yourself, am I the only person who can do this? Can this be delegated out to somebody, or can it be discussed with somebody else so that you don't feel quite so overwhelmed? Perhaps it's a letter you've received about your pensions, and you know that by discussing it with your money coach or your financial advisor, that this can be crossed off your list. Maybe you can talk about it with your partner. Maybe you've got a business buddy and you're feeling really overwhelmed about maybe launching a new program or going to attract new clients. And just by talking that through with somebody, that can really, really help you to manage that emotion of overwhelm. So that's the S, somebody else. Is there anybody else that can help you to do this? The second one then is H. So H is happen later. This is something that can stay on the list, but it's okay for it to wait. Like maybe this is something that isn't a priority, but you feel like, particularly when you're a perfectionist, like I'm a real finisher as well. So if I have something on my list, I feel really bad if it's still on my list the following day. So I feel overwhelmed, like loads. I really have to focus on literally just brain dumping everything out and then actually prioritizing and asking, can somebody else do it? Can I delegate it? Can it happen later? And that's really, really useful because it just gets it out onto paper. I actually use an app called Evernote. So I put everything onto Evernote. If I have an idea about something, it goes straight into Evernote. If I have an idea about a blog I want to write or a podcast I want to record, it goes into Evernote. And it's just like my little space, my little home of all the notes and things that are kind of all the creative stuff that's going on in my mind. I've just got somewhere to place that. So grab your highlighter pen and strike a list, like strike a colour through something you've put on your list that could happen later. It's okay for it to wait, like nobody's going to die. The third one then is O. So this is O as in one, the number one to ditch. So one to ditch. This is something that is outside of your control. In other words, it needs to come off your list because maybe you're feeling overwhelmed about something that isn't in your control. And that doesn't mean it doesn't go onto the list, because obviously if it's creating that emotion for you and you want to get rid of it, you need to brain dump it out first of all. One of the exercises that I do every single week is to journal, which is kind of what we're doing here, like a mini scenario of this. And if there's something on your list that is outside of your control, then maybe journal around that for like 5-10 minutes and get all the emotion, all the frustrations, all the pain, all those emotions out into your journal. And just leave it there, just park it there. And you'll be really surprised the power of just kind of getting it out onto paper, or if necessary, having a conversation with a friend about it can really, really help with that feeling of overwhelm. The final one then is E. Now this is E for emergency. So this is the stuff that you want to deal with right away. Like maybe this is the car that needs booking in for a service because otherwise you're not going to be able to tax it. Maybe this is the car insurance that's coming up for renewal. Maybe it's coming up to the end of your accounting year and you've got to get all your paperwork together for your bookkeeper. Maybe it's just to get yourself a bookkeeper. Like what is it that absolutely 100% has to be done today? What's on your absolutely has to be done urgent list? Maybe there's somebody you've not gone back to on an email and so you need to prioritize that. So what is the emergency? What absolutely 100% has to be done today? Now, once you've been through that kind of brain dumping exercise, so that's as a reminder, that's shoe. So it's someone else. Can it happen later? One to ditch, or is it an emergency? And then tip number 3 is to put a money date in your diary. Now, I'd highly recommend that you do this at least once a week, just like 30 minutes. This could be 30 minutes for you to then take charge of getting rid of that emotion, looking at your list and taking off those things that are, ditching the ones that don't need to happen right now, passing over the delegation or responsibility to someone that can help you, and then looking at those emergency ones, what absolutely 100% has to be done right now. So this could be 30 minutes to switch your bank account that you've been meaning to do for the last 6 months. Maybe it's looking at tracking your spending for the week. Maybe it's looking at renewing your insurances or logging your business miles or having a conversation with your partner about money. Go and listen to last week's episode with Carl Richards for some absolutely golden nuggets of information on this subject, by the way. It was a very lengthy podcast. And I make no apologies for that, really, because there's so much good information in there from Carl about how to have those difficult conversations with partners. So if that's an area that you really want to focus on and it's creating you overwhelm, then go and have a listen to that podcast. And I'd love to hear back from you, actually, what your thoughts were on some of the tips that we talked through on that particular interview. So feel free to drop me an email over at hello@themoneypanel.co.uk. Now, creating yourself time and headspace will really help you to get tasks done, get them off that list, and really start to feel less overwhelmed. Done is better than perfect. Trying to get things perfect will stop you from progressing with anything. Perfectionism doesn't give you any time or space to grow, only time and space to procrastinate. And if you think about it, the most likely reason that you're delaying getting started and feeling overwhelmed is the emotion of fear. Fear of being judged, fear of getting it wrong, fear of not being the best decision. And when you're fearful, it's because you don't understand something. If that's the reason, then go and find out about it. It's quite an interesting concept when we talk about fear not being the best, you're fearful of it not being the best decision. There's never a best decision. There's only a decision. Far better to make a decision and get it wrong and then learn from that than to not make any decision at all. So it's because you don't have, if it's because you don't have the time, well, which, let's face it, that's a big one. We have busy lives, right? Then go and create the time. Have you ever found yourself saying, I just don't have time to do this. I don't have time to go to the shops. I don't have time to sort out switching my bank. I don't have time to do this. It's because you don't have it's not because you don't have the time. It's because you haven't created the time. So make that your priority. Tip number 4. Stop telling yourself that you can't and start telling yourself that you can. The power of the mind is incredible. Be careful not to label yourself. So if you hear yourself saying, I'm not good with money, then guess what? You won't be good with money. If you tell yourself this, then it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy. I think, therefore I am. And it's really about focusing on increasing your knowledge and confidence in the area that you don't feel good enough in. So we have a saying in our house that there's no such word as can't. So every time my boys are like, oh, I can't do this, you can't do that, automatically me and my husband, we just say there's no such word as can't, because it is about choice and confidence and learning. If my boys say, oh, I can't multiply 25 by 500, it's not because they can't, it's because they don't know how to. So it's about having the confidence to actually find out the solution, go out and learn. How do we learn stuff as children? Or when we do learn stuff as children, we then build our confidence. So 4 months ago, I didn't know how to create a membership website or have the confidence to stream my podcast onto Facebook. So what did I do? I just went into overwhelm. I put it off. I listened to my inner critic and I didn't do it. But so then I kind of really mapped out, who do I need to help me with this? So I got some help. I spoke to a membership website expert. I joined the Membership Guys membership. I asked my website VA to help. I looked at who else was running memberships and spoke to them. I broke it down into manageable tasks, and you can do exactly the same. So the next time that you tell yourself you can't, tell yourself that you can. And then my final tip, number 5, is to focus on building strong foundations. Now, one of the most common questions I get asked is how to get started with investing. But more often than not, when I actually speak to the person asking the question, they don't have strong foundations. So what do I mean by this? Creating strong foundations is a little bit like sailing a boat. You need to have a strong boat sailing in the right direction and with an end destination in mind. So part of having a strong boat is to make sure that you've plugged all those money leaks, you've put your life jacket on. In other words, you've built an emergency fund and you know where you're heading. So many people that I speak to feel like they should have investments, but they don't really know what they're investing for. And therefore, it's very difficult to make a decision about where to invest or how to invest. Do I invest with an ISA? Do I invest via a pension? Unless you know where you're heading, it makes those kind of questions really difficult to answer. So it's understanding, have you built those strong foundations in the first place? If you don't have an emergency fund in place, I know people talk about this all the time. And one of the other questions that comes in a lot for me is about paying off debt versus building an emergency fund. But if you think about it, if you don't focus on building that emergency fund, something's going to come across and rock your boat. That could be the washing machine breaks down, or the car goes through a service and they tell you that, you need new brake pads and they're going to cost you £700. It's things like that can really rock your boat. And if you haven't got that backup plan, it can be really stressful. And then often if you don't have the funds, it goes on the credit card, and then you kind of get into this overspend and debt cycle. So it is really important, before you start investing, for example, before you start to do anything, focus on building strong foundations. And part of having strong foundations isn't just about the practical elements. It's also about building strong foundations in your mind. And I don't mean to get woo-woo with this, but getting strong foundations in how you feel about money and what are you telling yourself about money. Going back to my earlier tip, if you're telling yourself you're not good with money, then you won't be good with money. So maybe your focus should be about changing your negative language and actually, practice using some positive affirmations. I am good with money. Write a list of things that you're really good at, and actually focus on building some foundations around your mind as well as the practical elements of managing money. So if you're in overwhelm over money, stop and think about, what direction are you sailing in? Do you have money leaks that need plugging? Do you have an emergency pot that you can access in the event that you hit a rock? Who do you need in your boat to help steer the way, to help you avoid those nasty surprises? Focus on what matters the most. And remember, if you feel overwhelmed, replay this podcast or reread the blog to remind you of the small steps that you can take to remove that overwhelm and create some clarity. Now, next week, we're actually opening out the waiting list to our infamous Plug Your Money Leaks 5-day free challenge. You can head on over to the website and jump on the waiting list. And that's over at catherinemorgan.com. I'll pop a link in the show notes, and it's on the first page that you land on the website. I do hope that you can join us. It's a really, really fast-paced, fun, and incredibly insightful challenge. Some of the testimonials that we had from those of you that completed the challenge in June, July time when we ran it previously were literally life-changing. There was one particular lady that emailed me to say that for the first time in 34 years, she was able to have a conversation with her partner about money. She was able to identify what kind of relationship she had with money, where her money leaks were, and actually for the first time in 2 months later, she's now actually saving money rather than living in her overdraft. So just incredible results. So it's completely free. We run it via Facebook. So we have a special Facebook group designed for the challenge. And they are basically daily tasks that you do over 5 days that aren't too onerous, but will get you really thinking and identifying what your relationship is like with money and where are your money leaks. So please do come over and join us for the challenge starting in the first week of September. And I'll pop a link in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening to this week's podcast, and I'll see you all next week. You've been listening to Catherine Morgan's In Her Financial Shoes podcast. If you enjoyed this show, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on iTunes. And don't forget, if you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed and want to learn more about being financially resilient, confident and in control, head over to www.catherinemorgan.com.